as long as it's forward. God, send me anywhere, only go with me. Lay any burden on me, only sustain me. And sever any tie in my heart, except the tie that binds my heart to yours. If you have men who will only come if they know there is a good road, I don't want them. I want men who will come if there is no road at all. I will go anywhere, provided it be forward. David Livingstone.
Oh, thank you so much. You read that beautifully. That comes from the back of this year's Still a Moving Center Almanac, in which our theme is irreversibility, eyes to the stars. And so that is a quote all about moving forward. Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle we sponsor every week here at Still a Moving Center on Saturdays. And we take up our theme for the week in the Still a Moving Center Almanac. And we do so in a variety of ways. For example, today, our theme is one of a series on the Buddhist paramitas, or the Buddhist high virtues. And yet these virtues are so universal that we feel as if we can approach them from different traditions, which is something that the GEMS does, is look at things from all different traditions from around the world. And so this virtue of Viraga, the virtue of seeing the whole, we're going to look at from this standpoint of the virtue of seeing the whole. And as a matter of fact, we're going to look at it from the civil servant side of military leadership. We are very fortunate to have with us today Loida Begley, who joined us, I believe, at least we started really seeing a lot of her during the pandemic when she was back east and we were in Hawaii, and we would see her more and more coming to Still Moving Center classes. And in particular, she really engaged very fully in our Hawaiian offerings, especially our hula awana. She has worked in civil service for a long time, lives near Washington, D.C. And so when our kumu hula, our traditional Hawaiian hula teacher, Malia Helela, had research that she wanted to do in regard to her family and its musical tradition in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., who did she ask for help but Loida? And so we're very grateful for Loida's participation and especially for her help to our Kumu Malia. So Loida, I'm going to let you, if you would, will you introduce this topic? Tell us a little bit more also about what it is that you've done in service yourself as a civil servant. And we'll give it over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Renee, and welcome everyone. It's good to see you in this different light. I even wore like my work clothes just so I can be in a different spirit. So I don't know how much folks may know about my background. So from my work life perspective, so I thought I would start there. So I've been a practicing professional engineer, have been so since 2000. And I worked in the private sector for about 7 years, mainly in California. But my rule for work was the cooler the job, the more I wanted to do it. So I worked on designing tracks for light rail trains, coastal protection, drinking and wastewater treatment, transportation design, and the light rail that I did in LA. So I, out of California, San Francisco, and LA, was what really inspired me to go into public service, because I wanted to understand why we were making these decisions. So in general, the work that I've done, I'm a civil engineer, is primarily for the service of large groups of people, and really wanted to get to the heart of why certain decisions were made, how can we make them better? And that's what led me basically to Washington, D.C., and to do that at a different scale. So um, with that, I'm in Arlington, Virginia, and um, what I wanted to present today was a little bit of a framework that we use in leadership. So this concept of the civil service side, and then where it intersects with the military, is um, really, you think of generals and admirals and those types of folks providing a lot of the leadership to government. But there's also another side of it, which is the civil service side. And so I wanted to go through what that framework looks like. And I really chose this in light of the quote, the virtue, well, the topic, the virtue of seeing the whole, because in and of itself, it is a very holistic methodology. So, and it's something that I've been studying, aspiring to really for maybe 12 years. And then last year I served as we call it senior executive service, an executive for 1 year, and got to experience what that was like. So yeah, I have a PowerPoint. And then I think, did that work for you guys? Okay. So my goal here is really to just present and share something that's available to everyone. It's free. You just have to know the keywords and you can find it. But that's one of the really cool things about the government is that there is a lot of stuff that's out there, and has a lot of research behind it. It's just being able to find it. I mean, similar to like the Library of Congress, being able to go in and put your hands on some of these things. You just need to have a question and interest, and then you can go from there. So let's see, and then we have the quotes we selected for this, and I won't read it, but in general, the one that you found, Renee, about the President Dwight Eisenhower was really interesting because he came from a military background, and then he had to basically shift his thinking to think about, the whole planet. And this is from his farewell speech, but he's also famous for a speech called Atoms for Peace, which describes a little bit of the paradox and with even nuclear power and that discovery as well. So a lot of interesting push and pull with President Dwight Eisenhower. And then the idea from Mahatma Gandhi is that service can be in everything that you do. You don't need a title, and you don't need a job in it. It can be in everything that you do. So to carry that out, I'm hoping some of this can help give you ideas when you're in service to others. So with that, I just wanted to pose a few questions for you as we go through this for yourself. Hopefully it'll tie back when I go through my presentation, but these are a little bit of a preview too of what we'll be talking about. But wanted to put this on your, put this in your thought process. What characteristics of leadership resonate with you, and why? When you have been in service to others, one of those roles, which characteristics were the most important to you, and why? And when you were the change agent, or you needed to create change, how did you do it? So a couple of thoughts for you. And then maybe it's a situation, maybe it's something you witnessed, but those leadership characteristics, what were those? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a overview of this. And when I started researching civil service leadership history, it was so intense because you have to go all the way back to like the 1800s, and when there's so many different stories to be told. Um, and it was fascinating, but I'll just target on the modern concept of leadership that we have, but I have some resources in here in case you want to dig in a little deeper. And then we have this framework and what civil service leadership via the senior executive service means, what the breakdown of the system is, and then a little bit about, some reflections I had, especially from last year. So there's a lot of timeline with this, but the thing that was really fascinating for me was the Civil Service Act of 1883, when the government switched from the spoil system to the merit service system, or merit service concept. So spoil system was when whenever there was a switch in the political leadership, the entire government would clear out, and then people who had campaigned for the for the other for that winning side would populate all the jobs. And I think there were obviously some exceptions, but in general, that's how that worked. And then the merit system converted more to, well, maybe we need more stability, and then recognize that these are skills-based professions. Therefore, we need to have people with those skills populate these jobs. And so there were a lot of changes, especially in the 1920s, 1940s was a big time of change. But the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, which was President Carter's one of his big accomplishments, brought about several changes. But one of them was they created an office just to oversee this, Merits Systems Protection Board. And so we don't really get into that, but all that really does is strengthen the whole concept of expertise and hiring based on merit. And then it established this entire concept of the senior executive service. So there were predecessors, but it really wanted to formalize what this meant. So the senior executive service was established. Really what it is it determines that there's going to be basically executives who are held to a high standard when it comes to leadership skills, abilities, and knowledge, and capabilities. We call them competencies. And that, part of that is to live up to the ethics of the United States government. And executive core qualifications didn't come until like the 1990s, 1997. But it was the concept of like, well, you have these executives. Now, how exactly do you qualify these folks? What does that mean exactly? What does leadership mean? And so and I had trouble finding exactly how that development process was. It was probably inside an agency, so you can't really pull that unless you do really focused research. But from what I can tell, it was based a lot on the science at the time on leadership. And so there's certain organizational theories, books that actually still hold today, that a lot of the concepts that came out of the late 90s were very, very strong and based on the globalization that was happening around the world. So there was a lot of really good leadership work that was done, as still referenced to today, and 30 some odd years later. And so I want to introduce to you what some of those concepts are. So the executive core qualifications. So you can imagine like you're going to apply to one of these positions. Okay, I think I've got it. I've got everything. Where do I start? It lays out that these are the must-haves. They're all must-haves, but these are just by definition always part of it. It has to be very clear in everything that you do, your entire background, that you have these particular skills. So these are called the core competencies, interpersonal skills. And, one of the reasons I typed all this out, maybe it can be distributed, because there is so much in here that I think is really great. Treat others with courtesy, sensitivity, and respect. There's so much in all of these. So I'll just go through the characteristics: oral communication, integrity, honesty; written communication, continual learning; and public service motivation. So these are you must have these. These must be evident in everything you do. Then you go one level down, and it's 5 categories. So the executive core qualifications, really, so those are your must-haves. Well, I keep saying must-haves. They're all must-haves, but those are like you live, breathe, and sleep those. And then leading change, leading people, results-driven, business acumen, and building coalitions. And so these are the things that you need to really demonstrate in the work that you do. A lot of times you can't do all this at the same time. So certain assignments you're going to get are going to be more about leading change. Other things will be more about building coalitions. And then other times you just have to get the hiring done, the contracts done, the bills paid. That's your business acumen. So these are the bins, but underneath the bins, there are other characteristics. So you can see how complex this starts to get, especially when you're applying for a job. So under leading change, there's other definitions behind leading change: creativity and innovation. You can see from here, there's so many of these different subcategories, but the expectation is in this leadership role, you will meet all of these, and you will be able to do all of these things. So I'll just take one of them, which is one of the more famous ones, which is the leading change. So I mentioned that in the late 90s, there's like famous authors when it comes to change management. And it was John Kotter is sort of like the person that people will quote and they don't even know they're quoting him. Like, let's move some big rocks. That is John Kotter. And that leading change, anything in his series is still used today quite heavily. It's really worth reading. And he covers a lot of the strategy and vision, which is one of the higher order, more difficult things to achieve when you're in a leadership role. Kurt Lewin also promotes this model, but the interesting thing about this, I had never heard of him, but when I was researching, I found that he was the basis for a lot of the change management theory, which was really surprising because it went all the way back to he's from the 1940s. And there's a lot of academic articles written about his method, but it's a pretty simple concept. And then I found this comparison of the two. So this is a good takeaway. So his concept is to unfreeze, change, then refreeze, because the idea is, people want stability and some level of status quo, but you have to unfreeze the status quo, change it, but then also return to some sense of normalcy when you're done. Okay. So this was a little bit of a comparison, and this is from the Department of the Navy. It's from an older document, but sometimes these older ones are really great because, you can see people analyzing how things work, and you can agree or disagree, but the idea is people also think of these different, as progressions. So I've seen a couple of other models with this too, but the idea is that, some of these competencies you'll be able to do on your own. Other competencies you'll only be able to do in a team setting. And then other competencies you will get by being a supervisor. And then beyond that, you have to lead larger organizations to really gain some skill in this. So I'm going to transition a little bit to a tool. So a tool that's used in really the application process, but it's also kind of an interesting methodology that I haven't really, I've seen it in some other places, but it was interesting to put this in the light of storytelling. When you are providing your accomplishments, or even it's mainly in the application process, but even when you're reporting up and speaking to your supervisor, whatever it is, you do see this pattern come through. So it's called the challenge, context, action, result, and we call it CCAR. But this is the main methodology they have you use when you're applying, but it is also effective to bring into interview settings. When you have to explain something to somebody and you have a very short amount of time, this is a really good method to use too. So the challenge, what is the problem, the context, how did you get there, what are some of the factors you want the other person to consider, what did you do, and then what happened. So I picked one of the examples that they used, and I think I picked this one because it was the shortest, but it's also kind of entertaining. So I'll just read it to you, because I think I can do this one in character. As the office's senior manager, I served as the primary buffer between my staff and our customers, the firm's attorneys. In one case, I was able to diffuse an explosive situation that developed when one of my employees felt he was being unfairly pressured to design a new software program within a very short deadline challenge. The two employees had engaged in several shouting matches and within earshot of several attorneys and members of my staff. The entire firm was on edge, and the relationship between the attorneys and my staff had deteriorated as a result of this two-man battle. Context: I urged the men to meet with me and talk about the project and the attorney's expectations. Action: after 2 long sessions, the attorney agreed to stop monitoring my employee's progress and to extend the deadline date. Result: the tension in the office dropped significantly after the situation was resolved. In addition, my employee produced an excellent new software program for his client. Result: so it's like a tight little package. And bravo to this person. But I really like this example because one, it was short, but two, it is kind of where you want to go with it. Anybody can relate to this, right? So that is the CCAR in real life. So for me, like I said, I had served in this role. Oops, I think I clicked too many. All right, there we go. So for me, what I realized during that year when I served as an SES is what I really liked about going in ready, understanding how the system worked, was it did allow me to appreciate when others were bringing things to the table. Like, oh, that person I see what they're doing. They're building a coalition and a partnership. They're building their team. They're engaging others. I mean, it's a little bit of learning the language, but learning the language is what allows you to articulate what you see and give it a name. So this really helped in that context. And then also seeing like, well, maybe if they just sprinkled a little bit of this, it would have changed things. I'm not sure. And then you ask yourself, how about me? So the other I wouldn't say the real reason, but I think one of the reasons I was drawn to this more than a decade ago was, I'm always seeking more self-awareness and more intentionality. And this helped me grow that and ask myself, well, where do I want to grow? Where are my strengths? How can I feed that? And when I engaged in this role, it is hard to do in real life at the same time, kind of watch yourself and do it at the same time. But some of the items I wanted to work on was like strategy and vision, because I am somebody who just gets up and goes and just does the things. And so being able to explain it to the larger group was more difficult for me. And I noticed when other people were doing it, other senior SESs, I could go, wow, I'm in awe of them. I want to be around them so I can learn more. And the other thing that I was really thankful for this particular experience was that some of that you really can't get a sense of until you are in the role of managing a large group. So I managed a group of around 60 people, but we were in charge of a lot of different portfolios, which meant our span of contact, the people we were in touch with, in the hundreds and the thousands. So when you don't realize how many people are watching, so the leadership by example really is something that thankfully I believe strongly in, but it really came in handy several times, because people would say, well, I liked it when you did this. And I thought, wow, I didn't even realize I did that. But somebody was watching me. But it just emphasized, how important it was to be aware that these different ways of leading were possible. So with that, one fun thing I thought people could do is that CCAR example, the challenge, context, action, result. If you ever watch the news, especially if politicians are talking, it's interesting to apply that model, because I was doing that the other night, and it fell pretty closely into that. So it's just something fun to play with, to see as a method of storytelling, if it's used, if it's not used. And then I have some resources if you want to kind of check it out, but now you have all the buzzwords if you want to see what the system looks like and the concepts. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leda. Wow. If organization is included in all of those skills, which I think it's probably in every single category, you get an A plus.
Okay.
I think, all of us probably have comments and questions. I wanted to, if I could, lead off with one that you could probably address, and then it's also addressed to everybody in the group. Since at GEMS, we make this a very circular conversation. It's not like we've put Loida on the hot seat and she has to answer everything. So I was just wondering, I guess I got the idea of it when you showed that little kind of step up chart where there was like personal leadership, and then maybe it was organizational leadership, and then it was institutional leadership. And it seemed like if you're just organizing your own affairs, or maybe just like your little family's affairs, personal leadership, then there's then there's the team and group. Thank you. That's the one. And then the institutional. It seems like with every level, the person needs to get like a broader and broader perspective, higher and higher perspective, because they're looking at a larger whole and having to consider a larger whole. And I wanted to see what you thought about that, and then everybody else, what's your experience in life? Having a responsibility perhaps to look for that broader whole.
Yeah, and I like how you put that, because you don't have to be in charge of those people. You don't have to be the supervisors. to feel that connection, you know? So the more people you know, the more communities you're part of, I think you will start to feel and see more of these attributes shifting from, you know, you managing yourself, which is the core. That's the thing, that's the where everything starts. And then how that leads into team or group leadership or institutional leadership. But the design of this is a little bit like those different sizes of communities. But in my case, 60 people isn't a lot of people to manage. But when we think about how many communities we touch, then it starts numbering into the thousands. So that's where that kind of comes into play.
Ooh, I think 60 is a lot. Let's see, why don't we go ahead for now and take off the slideshow, and then if we have other questions that we want to refer to, and then this allows us to see one another just a little better. So nice to welcome all of you here. Other people have thoughts and questions in regard, especially with the presentation that Loida gave us of civil service, of this idea of the virtue of seeing the whole, experiences that you have, etc.
Thank you, Loida, for that. That was like super interesting. I was looking at it for a very philosophical aspect, and you like brought it very like close to earth. And it's a good combo to also then hear Renee to say this perspective. And you got me thinking from the very beginning when you asked the questions like, what are the characteristics of like leaderships that resonates with me? And the whole time you were talking and going through it, it really resonated with me, like integrity has the number one, right? To be able to lead others, you yourself have to be honest, have to be truth, have to live in integrity. And interpersonal relationship, it doesn't matter if you're leading 60,000 people, have to be able to be kind, to communicate effectively and clear. So yeah, I think there is a virtue in having those two qualities to be able to see the whole. So thank you for that. And thank you, Renee, too, for your comment. It's a good perspective.
Mm-hmm. Who else? Thank you, Sharani.
Thank you.
You know, we're really fortunate, by the way, to have somebody here. And I don't know, maybe there's more than one, but we do have one person here who has served in the U.S. military, and that's John Powers, who has the face of some sort of dog on his screen. So we're really glad to have you. And I think he lives not that far from you compared to us.
Oh.
Diana, on the Big Island, thank you for tuning in.
What struck me was the idea of that challenge, context, action, and result. Because I think that if we, you know, if as a leader to really get what the problem is and the challenge, because many times we try to figure out something, but we really don't know what we're figuring out. You know, we have, this is a problem, but what is the problem concretely? It's like you said, we can go up here, but how do we get it down? And then the context of how did we get here, or what, knowing the history or knowing what's happening that is creating that problem. And then the action is, what do we do now? You know, what's the action plan and the results? And I think this is true in our individual lives as well as in the bigger pictures and politics and everything of seeing, getting clear and working. And I think your Sharonia, the integrity and interpersonal relationships are really important. And one of the things I really liked you were talking about is when we are in a leadership, we are leadership to ourselves, to our family, to our company, to our nation, whatever it is. It's like, how do we bring other people up? You know, what you were talking about is the awareness of other people's leadership skills, because the more I work with people, that to empower them to be able to use their gifts and talents and to really feel that they're being seen allows them to become the best version of themselves, but it also lets me become the best version of myself. So I think those are some of the concepts I was thinking about when we're thinking of leadership. And I think the idea of how do we build coalitions, or how do we work together so that the bigger picture is seen. And the one more thing, that, well, not one, it's a little section. I wrote down the core competencies of interpersonal skills, oral communication, integrity and honesty, written communication, continual learning, and public service. And I think those are really important. It's very clear about what's needed. And again, it's not just in when we're working, but how do we do that in our family? How do we do that with those that we love and that in community? And then how do we take that out into the bigger picture of politics and all that's going on in our world? I mean, it really is very sobering to me. And so thank you. That was really an interesting way to look at it, and brought it very clearly down into everyday life. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can just add something that I just remembered, that Shrone had mentioned about, and you emphasized, Diana, is about the integrity. There's a couple of other systems that overlap on this, the systems of thought. So as an engineer, there's like code of the engineer. So it's like an oath that you can take. There's also this concept of safety culture, but and safety culture, performance culture, but at the core of all of those is that integrity piece, and a lot of it is about setting that example, and so it does. And I think, from the Hawaiian value system of the Pono, it's, that's, I think, a little bit broader, but it's closer to what it actually feels like, because it's not just following a list of ethics and checking the box. It's like feeling it, living it, showing it, being it. So I think that is something that I do think is in common, with the civil service oath, with, in Hawaii as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think often about this concept of pono, and it's not just what's fair or what's right, it's also what's balanced, what is taking into consideration all of the different things so that there's a rightness. And sorry, I dropped in and out, but I really liked what you were talking about, using kind of the storyline to get that larger, that bigger perspective in view. And I was just curious if there's any like experiences that you had or have had that have just kind of been that experience that you needed to like have that bigger view. If there's anything that you could share about that, I think that would be pretty neat. Thank you.
Sure. I'm just thinking, like, what was a really good one? So one of the things, yeah, and I was trying to think back to when I was a practicing engineer in the field, and we didn't really experience it until I came into government. So that was interesting too. But the actually stepping into that role of the SES, one of the things I had to do as soon as I came in was work with peers. And some people had been my boss multiple times, and now I had become their boss. So it was really, I thought it was going to be really awkward, and it kind of was initially. And, then I had to realize that there was a certain grief and loss to the change that had happened. So the thing I felt the most was this leading change aspect, and this idea of going and being gentle, because even though there's a lot of, people want things done now, do it, very action oriented culture. but this idea that I had discussed it with HR, so I'm very collaborative too. And they said, I think these people have been through enough. I think you need to be gentle with them. And I said, okay, that's my style anyway. But I was surprised how effective that was. And things seem like they're gonna last forever, and they really won't. So it took like 2 months before they warmed up to it. But then after that, I was getting so many, like, I indicate, I determine whether or not it's working by how many phone calls I get or emails that were completely unnecessary, but were just like people being vulnerable with me and trying to just share, their highs, mainly their highs, because if they're sharing their lows, they're going to do that anyway. But if they're like, Lloyd, this happened today, I'm so happy. That's sort of my indication that, like, okay, I've connected with them, and we're ready, we're ready to make some changes together, so it's a little bit like the softer side of those tables that were like, freeze, unfreeze, then you can solidify the change. But there's a special touch. But we're often asked, what's your leadership style? And that, I think, is more my stylistic element that I bring, which is this: I will sit for hours on the phone with somebody. There was someone who experienced a lot of loss around Thanksgiving, and one of my employees, and after my parents went to bed and he was in a different time zone, I was on the phone with him for 3 hours just listening. So, I mean, that's my leadership style. So that's what I learned. But it's like, oh, I'm a lot more intense in this other direction than I thought.
Thank you, Lloydia. When I heard this term integrity repeated by a couple of you, it reminded me that being imperfect myself, as I'm so frequently made aware of, and yet wanting to be in integrity, I think maybe it may be part of that larger perspective is to be able to zoom out and see how whatever step we took might have affected other people. And then with that recognition, seeing a greater whole than just maybe the way I had been looking at it from my perspective originally, then be able to self-correct. And so kind of like getting back on track. So maybe integrity doesn't just mean being perfect all the time and always listening carefully, always thinking of others first, but if we get off track, to be able to, change courses, perhaps apologize. I don't know whether that was one of those qualities, and, admit error and then go forward from there. And I just wonder what people think of that as another aspect of, seeing from this larger perspective, or seeing the whole. Izumi, I'm seeing your head nodding.
This topic is a very big thing for me, and I don't know how to make a comment about the leadership, but I used to get confused with the leadership and dictatorship, because when I was small, I grew up in Japan, and in my time, all teachers are the leaders. Any teachers were leaders, and they can spank us physically, and there's what you can get punished when you do something wrong, and that was allowed. And a lot of times that I take it as the way it is, and but then I always thought that the world's been changing, and we have internet services, we can be online anywhere, and how come we cannot upgrade our internal, our heart, our how come we cannot upgrade us internally? And I think it comes with a um, important concept of the leadership I read in Lahi Lahi's paper. And I just go, those are the things that we should all learn from, whether you are going to be a leader or not. And I thought we should all, I don't know, get a lesson from Lahi Lahi, Loida.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's very good message that you're sending out.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm saying.
It was a good message. Maybe I'll read aloud what we're hearing from Rachel to everybody in the chat. Integrity without effort, allowing yourself to be guided back and trusting the guiding. Giving grace to ourselves for being perfectly imperfect and letting go of our pursuit of that perfection, I think. Insofar as we hold ourselves and our joy and self-worth hostage to how well we perform perfectly. Yeah, we don't want to do that. Our upgrades are intentional and not always simple as pushing a button, which we can do with a computer program, right? And they are worthy pursuits, commitments to lifelong learning and growing. Oh, thank you, Rachel. I'm seeing John Power's hand.
Yeah, hi, Renee and everyone else. Loida, I have a question for you. I'm a bit of a philosophical curmudgeon sometimes when I hear people talk about leadership, because you see these books that are very popular, the 11 habits of successful people, and people get the idea if they if they adopt those 11 habits that they're going to be successful. But I think they get causality sort of turned around backwards, because sometimes it's successful people who exhibit certain characteristics rather than the people who exhibit characteristics become successful, if you know what I mean. Because otherwise leadership turns into a paint by numbers thing, or a recipe for bread. You add 2 cups of flour and some yeast and this, that, and the other thing, and you knead it and bake it, and you got a loaf of bread. You've got a leader. So I'm wondering if you've given any thought, I'm sure you have, to the intangibles that can't be reproduced, because what the government and other institutions are trying to do is reproduce leaders. Let's make a bunch of leaders, so we figure out what the leaders need, and let's make sure they've got all those things, we can check all those boxes, and then voila, we produce leaders. But is it really that? Just wondering about your thoughts on that idea.
Sure. So I think these characteristics kind of feeds into a little bit of a fixed mindset. So I like how they name it competencies, because competencies you can grow, and competencies it's a practice. So I think the way they present it is more accurate with real life, in that, I'm innovative, so why am I not getting promoted, right? That's the thought, or so-and-so is innovative, why aren't they the leader? Or if I just do all these things, maybe I can become the leader, which it's true, but you have to do them. So you can't just think, I want to be innovative. It's like, have you put yourself in a position where you had to kind of innovate your way out of it? And it's, so there's some elements to this where there's a couple of truisms I hold, which is, the integrity is the number one thing in the leadership by example, because that's also making yourself vulnerable sometimes, having to say you're sorry, being the first one to do it, being the first one to say, hey guys, I miscalculated that. I know that, I'll fix it. So it's taking that first step and showing the example, but that in and of itself is really challenging. So it's like, if you can get that one down, a lot of the other ones kind of help, kind of fall in line, and they're more skills based. So there is a little bit of a mix between skills based, like technical acumen. I can be around somebody who's technical and learn technical acumen. But I think one of the things that you touched upon was like, the way I interpret it is, but there's a magic to a charismatic leader, just like there's a magic to a charismatic artist. You don't just learn all the ballet forms and then all of a sudden, why am I not at the Met? Yeah, why am I not in the Royal Ballet? There's a magic, but to trust that the practice will bring you there, I think that is where the magic happens, is in the training, is in the practicing, is in the making yourself vulnerable and trying again. So I think maybe that was the connection between me and dance, why I like the dance form so much, and these other challenging things like trying to learn Olelo is is that you just keep going, you keep trying, and you learn a little more, but you have to be observant about it and self-aware, and just go in the next day and keep going. So there's a resilience to it that I think will get you through it. But sometimes if you're not willing to go into some of these spaces, or they're not really for you, then yeah, you're not going to, well, I'm a strategic visioner. Well, what does that really mean? You can make it your own, and it can mean something because it now has your touch on it. So I would say it's more from that perspective of a self-growth.
It was interesting as well to hear how you, after you had these different characteristics or competencies and skills outlined of what might make a good leader, even though maybe you can't just mix them together like a batch of bread. Anyway, still, you were better able to recognize them in others. And once you were able to recognize them, and that does take a certain perspective, I think, then it probably allowed you to see how you might aspire toward that, because you saw how it was being instantiated by someone else doing it. Oh, that's what it means to whatever one of those was that you do, right? So maybe there was that virtue to it as well. Other thoughts? Anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak yet? Yeah, John.
Oh, I have one other thought too, Loida. So I was thinking about leaders, and I used to work in the federal space. I was a civilian contractor and worked there for quite a while. And just so I'm thinking about leadership. And of course, one of my favorite leaders is Churchill. He was a very charismatic man, but I think he failed some of those core competencies. he had some very serious deficiencies, which caught up to him at the end of the world, the war in peacetime, and the people got tired of him and threw him out of office. But I'm just wondering, if you took these all the requirements for leadership and you applied them to, say, political leaders, how would they fare?
Yeah, so uh, my experience with the political leaders, so we get in the federal government, and I think this is a little, I'll simplify it. There's more to it, is basically like when you hear Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, and um, Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. These are people who are selected from the political party who did win, and then they put in appointees. So there's something called political appointees. I would say for the political leaders that I have worked with, they 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 have all been phenomenal. Like, yeah, incredible, incredible. I mean, and and in a funny way too, because they're politicians. I would say their communication skills are what you probably pick up on, those core competencies. So they have that times 1,000. It's it is really interesting to see really close up that skill set. But my only interaction is really with people who, they're still politicians, but they're political appointees. So they're picked based on their skills.
It was really interesting part of the history that you unfolded, that whenever there was a change in the president, all of the people who were in the civil service branch would change along with that person. And that left just about zero continuity. So things that had been rolling along in a certain way for the sake of the public, all of a sudden the people who were making sure that that happened disappeared, and new people who probably had no idea of what those things were trying to, or maybe even not trying to take over those tasks. So then the recognition that there is a set of skills, experience, history, and so on that would be good to keep as a continuity, even while on the leadership, it could be changing and there are going to be different emphases to policy and so on. But just the basic core, let's keep the government running, could be continued on by having these leaders in civil service. That was fascinating to me, that it didn't always used to be that way. It was also a really nice recognition that in this time when we think of ourselves as a country so polarized, or I mean, we're kind of being pushed to think of our country that way. Really, when you look at the civil service side of things, there's a huge continuity that is threading together a lot of different presidencies and keeping things going for all of us. And so I'm glad not to take that for granted anymore. That was a really neat part of history to learn about. I'm going to mention to all of you now what we're going to be looking into in our future weeks, as somebody maybe gets ready to give Loida a little vote of thanks, since we've come to the top of our hour. And I want to, of course, thank all of you for your participation. Next week, we are going to take up the topic of sleep and dreams. And I don't know yet. I've asked Elizabeth Saturas, our evolutionary biologist friend, if she might be willing to undertake that. And the following 2 weeks, in September 21st and 28th, we have two concepts that I think lead really well, one into the other. Consciousness of divine will and Svadharma. And Svadharma means like one's personal duty that one recognizes this is really what my life, what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. It's something along those terms. And we may have one person who takes both of those up. He's someone who speaks from the Hindu Shaivite tradition, and his name's Piyush Kumar. So I'm still waiting to hear from him on that. But those are some possibilities in terms of speakers and topics. And then for sure on October 5th, one of our frequent speakers, as John Powers has actually been a speaker for us many times, is Kurt Gradine, and he's going to speak to us on the swan. There we go. Is there somebody who would like to give Loida a vote of thanks? Thank you, Kumu Malia. Malia is our Kumu hula that I referenced, our traditional Hawaiian hula teacher.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much, Lahi Lahi. I feel like in so many ways you really brought your own unique competencies here to share with all of us. And I feel like you are such an example of grounded charisma. Just listening to you speak and the way that you've presented so much wisdom in such a concise way, I think really is setting that example of integrity that we can all see and appreciate. And thank you so much for sharing with all of us today. Mahalo nui.
Yes, thank you so much. We keep the lines open if anybody wants to stay on for a little bit longer. We have chats in the on the side that have delved into the Hindu gunas of Rajas and Sattva, and into the book Winnie the Pooh and its author A.A. Milne, who wrote some of Churchill's speeches, evidently. So interesting things going on the sides.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you so much, Loida.
Aloha, everybody.
Thank you, Loida.
Aloha.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Loida. Bye, Lahi Lahi.
Thank you, Loida. Thank you. I'm so happy you did this talk because I feel like I see you in class, and I think you attended some of my yoga classes, and I never got to know you. And I feel like I got to know you a little better after this. And so thankful. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really, really fun to see you in your business clothes and speaking from your professional standpoint. And oh, Mayu has so much to share. I hope you'll speak for us again. Rachel, it's great to have you tune in. I see palm trees in your background. I don't know if that's because you are in Hawaii or you wish you were in Hawaii.
Yeah, I live in Hawaii, but right now I'm in my hometown of Gainesville, Florida. And before I moved to Hawaii, I put up all the tropical decorations and things. And yeah, thank you so much for having these gym conversations. It was really wonderful first experience.
Yeah, they always are. They're quite amazing. And we kind of do a successor piece on Sundays at noon. We have something called satsang, and in that we take up the specific quotes for the week and each day of the week and delve into them deeper. And it's an opportunity to really go more into, like, how do I live this in my daily life?